Today, we have the gigantic pleasure to be speaking with Dr. Wendy Liddell. Dr. Wendy Liddell is not only the president of Great Northern University in the pristine and beautiful Spokane, Washington, in the Pacific Northwest in the United States, but also she's my former boss. And what an amazing boss you were to work for, Wendy, for those 7 years that I was teaching in Spokane. It's great to be able to see you again.
Yes, I would agree, Jonathan. It's delightful.
Thanks so much for taking the time for this conversation. I'd love to get caught up with you a little bit and also to talk about your work in founding a university. So one of the things that I'm looking forward to learning, and I hope our listeners are looking forward to learning this hour with us, is how to become a university president. Wendy, but first, before we get into that, this has been a rough season of COVID for a lot of us. We're recording in the first week of January in 2022. And it looks like we're going to be heading into a third year of COVID. What's giving you joy in this COVID season?
Yeah, that's a great question, Jonathan. I was just reflecting on that, and I'm reading through the book of Genesis again, and it's starting the new year, starting in Genesis, reading God's word, hopefully through this year. And I think I've just been encouraged by the Lord. Encouraged by the fact that we serve a God who is not afraid of transitions or journeys or travels. In fact, that he calls his people to do that, to Abraham, to come to a land which I will show you, and to pack up your family and to go there. And as I've thought about these last couple of years and what it's meant, it's been a journey. It's been an unexpected journey. You don't quite know where it will end or what the next step will be, or what you'll wake up to the next day. But yet we serve a God who is faithful. We serve a God who is in charge of all things, the God of heaven and earth, the with Emmanuel, God with us, and he's trustworthy regardless of what comes. So I've been encouraged primarily just by the Lord, time with him, time with his people, and time with the students that I work with, and the ways that he's working in small ways and big ways in this season, despite the challenges that are there. So that's been encouraging to me.
Wendy, you live in the beautiful Spokane in the Pacific Northwest. One of America's best kept secrets, the sign that used to greet you as you'd step off the airplane there in Spokane is near nature, near perfect. And I think that was a pretty apt description of the area. How long have you lived in Spokane?
Jonathan, I moved here in 1998 to student teach and ended up marrying my husband. So man, that's 20 something years. And I think truthfully, we'll probably be here for another, however long, at least another 20 years. So who knows what retirement will hold, but again, this is home and we're grateful to be here.
Retirement will hold skiing and backpacking. Wendy, sounds great.
Yes.
Wendy, you are not only a practiced leader, somebody who's had a really unique challenge and is leading a really unique opportunity, but you're also a scholar of leadership. You earned your Ph.D. From Azusa Pacific University in leadership, specifically writing your dissertation on women in leadership. Let's talk about what leadership is to you. So would you be willing to share with us some of your core principles of what you believe good leadership is?
Yeah, sure. That's a great question, Jonathan. I think as a follower of Jesus, the first principle for me is essentially that I'm a follower of Christ, that God has given the work set before me for me to do to his glory, with what he's given me, that he is the ordainer of all good works, that it's his work that I'm involved in, and I'm called to give him my best and to do my best for him so that he would be honored. So I think that principle is key to me, is I lead out of my relationship with Christ, and in leading, hopefully I'm being conformed to the image of Christ in that, and that he's working in me. And I testify that I've seen that. Some of these things have just scared me to death, right? To stand up and say we're starting a new school, I felt like my reputation was on the line as a higher ed leader. And most recently we had a situation where with a matching grant where the individual said, all right, let's do it in a month. I was like, okay, you want this matching grant to be met in a month? Okay, all right, let's do it. We're listening to other people, listening to the Lord, not allowing my fear to get in the way of what God's speaking through other people and how he's working. I'm just seeing him continue to just in all the best ways, hopefully me becoming more of a vessel that he can use. And so that's core to me, is my relationship with the Lord. I think also connected with that is the degree of humility. I want to be somebody that walks in humility. I think Christ is a great example of what that means. That also is connected to servant leadership, one of the characteristics from that. I also tend to be somebody who's out in front. I know there are others who lead from the side or lead from behind, but for me and my personality, and again, into who I am, I prefer to be leading in the front. And that's not everyone's style. That just happens to be me. And then finally, I think I'm also a big believer in team when it comes to leading, that you're leading teams, groups of people, to walk and hopefully develop, to grow, to become who God wants them to be, to move into the places that God wants them to be, to function as a group. I think one of the testimonies of Great Northern is that as a team, we've seen God do what we could never have envisioned as a single person or, a couple people. So leading a team is very important to me, and leading them well. It's been an area of growth, but I think it's essential that it's magnified almost. We've seen a group of people magnified when we work together and bring our gifts to the table, and then those create something that we never could have individually done. So those are some principles for me that are essential. I was thinking leadership theory wise, there's a leadership theory by Scott Rodin called Steward Leadership, which I love. It's for believers that comes out of this idea of being a steward. I also, in the broader leadership categories, generally like transformational leadership and servant leadership are two other theories that I lean into personally as a leader.
Wendy, most of us want to be good leaders. We don't necessarily want to get out in front. Not everybody has the personality for that. And doing something challenging scares all of us, but most of us want to do something courageous and worthwhile in our lives. And in most capacities, that's going to require some form of leadership. How do we learn leadership?
Yeah. There are a couple things come to mind when I think about this, Jonathan. One, for the believer, I think in following Christ, he leads us in a meaningful service. So in whatever that looks like, he gets to determine that, right? I think that's one of the things that I have wrestled with often is trusting the Lord with what he set before me to do. That if it doesn't appear meaningful to me at first, then I still one is trusting the Lord that he knows the reasons, that he knows the work to do, and that he is self-glory through that work. And again, for me, really are seeing peace in that I don't need to worry about manufacturing or my own gifts not being used. I just need to walk with you and to do what you've called me to do. The other piece I find as well is and this is a little bit of me, but when you talk about things that influence you, the people you read, the people you listen to, the people you surround yourself with, there are those adages that still hold true, that good company produces in my mind goodness. So involving ourselves with people who you want to emulate, those who you admire, listening, watching, asking questions if you have the opportunity to do so. And then another part of it, Jonathan, honestly, has been doing it. And again, the Lord has to open those opportunities to do it. But I tell my leadership class, all of our students at Great Northern are required to take a leadership class. And I tell them, say yes, right? Raise your hand. It gets easier. It doesn't seem to get easier over time, but somebody needs somebody to make announcements on Sunday morning in church. Raise your hand. Yes, I'll do it. You'll probably not do it to your best. You'll learn from it. Somebody needs somebody to be a camp counselor. Yes, your boss needs somebody to take an extra, be a shift leader at work, volunteer, because in those opportunities, those small opportunities build into greater opportunities. Scripturally, we see that he's entrusted with little, entrusted with, that little to much. And courage is not built, for myself, courage is not built in the big moment when it comes. It's built in the 20 years of small moments where you said yes previously. When we talk about our team at Great Northern, one of the things for myself that was important was Scott and I were part of a church plant for 15 years. Well, the church plant is very similar to starting a university, and a lot of the similar principles and realities that you go through. And I look back and think saying yes to being part of a church plant was part of me then being able to say yes to starting a university, because it has similar principles. So, and thinking of advice to people, in the moment, say yes to the small things, right, that are set before you, the challenges that may be a little bit out of your reach, the things that are scary, all of those opportunities, and then allowing that courage to build into something greater. So if that's helpful, Jonathan, I don't know. I've thought about this often as I've tried to not coach, but teach undergraduate students. And that doing piece is something where I think, yeah, that means for them that they just have to do it.
It was a great answer. Pardon the interruption. I was swapping out a camera. One of the cameras doesn't last more than about half an hour. So pardon.
I'm sorry.
It's just
You're fine.
The state of the technology. Sorry about that.
You're fine, Jonathan.
Cool. Wendy, I'm going to go a little experimental. If you don't like this question, you can bat it away and we'll just keep going on. But I'd like to ask you. So, Wendy, I'm fascinated by your story and fascinated by your preparation for this courageous act. You said that courage is not built in the big moments. It's built in the many small decisions leading up to that. That's a very powerful principle you've articulated. Let me ask you a question. What are the unique temptations of a leader? So working in a team, we all have different seats on the bus. We're all occupying a different social space of these communities, these human communities that we're involved in. And the leader has a unique opportunity, also unique temptations. Tell us how to avoid those, how to practice avoiding and resisting the temptations that are particular to those big moments when one is called to a role of leadership.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there's been a couple of moments that have caught me, and this may not be unique to everyone else. I have reflected that I think one of the things that's unique about the environment that we're in as a Christian institution is that we believe that God is in this and that he's directing us and he's leading us. And I've had moments where it's easy, and I think people want you to claim some sort of ownership when really you're, as Scott Rodine says, you're just a steward, right? You're just somebody who's been given a seat for a season by the Lord. And yet, this sort of, well, what did you do? And what have you done? And I think the temptation is to say, oh yeah, I'm a great leader. Oh yeah, I was ready for this. I was looking for this. But in reality, I feel like I just said yes to God, fearfully and half scared to death, and was willing to sacrifice my reputation for something that I thought that he was in. And so I think that's the first, at least for a Christian leader, the first temptation is to claim some of God's glory, to want to not tell his story, but to tell your story, and to be an owner instead of a steward of what he's given you. And I think that temptation every time I write something is to claim personal glory instead of saying, hey, look what God's done. Look how God's leading us. Oh, thank you so much for responding. The right answer is thank you for responding to the Lord, not I wrote a really great piece of persuasive literature for you, right? You responded to the Lord, not in what the Lord's doing, not to me. So I think that one's one for leaders, is the constant temptation to think that it's about you and it's about God. And in that, another one is also, again, that sort of selfishness of not announcing that the work that's been done is the work of many people, right? When I look at Great Northern, I think it's the testimony of a team. It's the testimony of a community. It's the testimony of starting out with people who said, I'm praying and I think you should start a school, right? That had the courage to actually email us and say, start a school. I think the Lord's in this. I think you should do this. And then going forward, it's the temptation to say that, that it just is this, that it's tempting to not recognize the gifts and the gifts of others, regardless of what position they hold, to again, kind of claim that as, oh yeah, I'm a great leader and that's why we're here. No, I actually work with an incredible group of people who are gifted and courageous and gritty and persevering, and that's why we're at where we're at. Is God just brought together the right group. I think mentioned Dr. Jennifer Mills earlier. She's a fantastic writer, an incredible writer and producer. She's written most of our documentation for all of our applications. I think we could have done it without her, right? Because she is that sort of, you have to be able to write and write well, and she does it. And I don't. But so I think of even that, like that, there's another example of a team, and then editors and people who have edited the work. And even reflecting yesterday, our person who financially manages the finances, I trust her that everything is done well by the book when it's supposed to be done. You can't run an institution without somebody who cares about the details of finances. And God brought that person. So yeah, those are two unique challenges, I think. I find also the other one is similar, is not to listen, to think that your idea is the best idea in the room because you have the position at the table. When in reality, again, if you believe that God's brought together a team, that there's consensus in that, there's work in that, that's another easy one, is to think my idea is the best. But that humility piece comes in, that idea of the Lord speaking through his people, confirming it through his people, has to be a piece of how that's done. So those are a couple ways, Jonathan. I'm sure there's more, but it is, there's lots of potential pitfalls.
Thank you so much for your response, Wendy. I'm glad I asked. That was a very inspiring response. Thank you.
Well, honest.
And that's what makes it inspiring. Yeah. Oh, I'm resonating with what you're saying. I'm feeling it. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Wendy, so you wrote your dissertation. I think you completed your dissertation in 2018. Is that correct?
Yeah, 2017. Yeah, literally the summer before I essentially started Great Northern.
So you had all of 12 weeks to take a deep breath before you were going to put all of that learning to work. Amazing. You wrote your dissertation specifically on women in leadership. Let's focus in on that topic for just a moment, if you would. What attracted you to this field of research, women in leadership, and what were you hoping to learn?
Sure. I generally have loved the topic of leadership, generally enjoyed it. So read books on it starting in my college years, and have enjoyed that piece. And when I went to Azusa, I had narrowed it into the question of women leadership. And I think somebody had reflected one time that all dissertations are autobiographical. So some aspect of that was connected to my personal story in choosing the topic, but also having been in Christian higher education, and maybe however you put it on the spectrum, particularly conservative Christian education, it was intriguing to me to think about the role and the interaction of women leaders in that space. And so I think that was particularly a draw for me when I went into that topic, or went into that program, was what does it look like to be a Christian, as a female, as a leader? What does that mean?
Wendy, our culture is, we're all just fish swimming in water here, but from where I swim in the water, it seems like one of the big global cultural projects right now is to flatten out the differences between the genders. Let's see how similar we can understand men and women to be. And when we do that, we might miss some of the differences between the genders as well. In your view, do men and women lead differently?
Yeah, that's a great question, Jonathan. Some of the research has come out that no, they don't. They don't. There's not, the differences are not there. Now, there'd be others who would say, yes, they do. Yes, there's differences. And some of them that come to mind, one would say that that women are more relational and men are more agenda driven. Where I stand personally, I would probably say that I think some of it comes out as a function of personality, giftings, experience. I don't know if I would agree. I would agree that I don't know if there's a difference in how individuals lead personally. Now, then if we were to go a step further and say, do I think there are pathways that are different for men and women? That's the part where I'd probably say, yes, I would. Was recently looking at, I think, female college presidents, and only 30% of them are female. And that statistic's pretty common across companies. But when I look at pathways for women into leadership, oftentimes they are delayed or deferred through personal choice or family situations. Typically, women are caregivers, whether it's for children or aging parents. Oftentimes, then that delays the amount of experience that individuals need to get into senior leadership roles. So that part of the pipeline, just sheerly on timing, is often delayed for individuals. There are other pieces of choice as well that sometimes come into it for women, of just wanting a better work-life balance. However, I don't know if generationally that's going to hold true in this next generation, because both genders value work-life balance. So I think there are some aspects, but again, you can meet a relational male leader and you can interact with a hard-driving, agenda-driven female leader, just based out of the personality and experiences. So it was a fascinating, and I think it's an area of research that's still needed, but it was a fascinating dive. I would say, Jonathan, experientially though, it's been interesting. The interesting part though is, I think this is just kind of unformed thoughts, so this is just speaking in an unformed way. The interesting part though is, I think, being a female leader, that there is though an encouragement to young women when they see a female in a position of leadership that's been unique. That I'm also on a board for a Christian school, and I know that I've had women employees come up to me and say, thank you for serving on the board as a woman, right? And I think that is another piece that I didn't necessarily see in the literature, and maybe I wasn't looking for it as deeply, but that's another piece when I reflect upon kind of male versus female leadership, is I think there's something inherently encouraging to younger women when they see someone of their own gender in a place of influence, that encourages them. So that piece, I would say, has been more interesting, and living that out is being encouraging. The sheer fact that I'm a female in a position of leadership is encouraging to other women, in whatever way that looks like. But that's just been a personal, as I was looking at your question and thinking about, that's just been a personal reflection moment. That's not a research-based statement. That's just been something I've noticed, that I thought, okay, this is hopefully influencing and inspiring other women to do things that may not be leadership-based, but would be interesting or encourage them, and to pursue whatever the Lord would have for them.
Cool. Thanks for taking that question about, are there differences between men and women as they lead? Mm-hmm. What about following the leadership of a man or of a woman? In your view, are there differences, what employees need from men leaders or from women leaders? Are there differences between those two things?
Yeah, again, I know I think about followers. So let me just speak relationally. I'm not, I just finished a recent personality test, and it came out that I'm not relational. I mean, I'm inspiring and engaging, but I'm not this like deeply relational person. And maybe emotionally engaged in ways that others are. which I've known that about myself. And when I was thinking about, the people that I lead are emotional, relational, and what does that mean for me to kind of put patterns in my day where I stop by everybody's office and kind of engage or have a conversation, when I'd rather be in my office checking off my boxes and thinking strategically about getting something done. So again, I probably point to, I think, recognizing that everyone around you has different needs based upon who they are, and how do you meet those as a leader being important, to be thoughtful, to be considerate, to recognize that regardless of gender, people are built differently, and how do you encourage and engage with them is valuable. Regardless of who you are, how do you serve them, I think, is the piece of that. Now, theologically, or in certain spaces, I'm very cognizant of the fact that within conservative Christian spaces, being a female leader of a Christian college is sometimes a detriment. That there are people based upon theological convictions who don't believe I should be serving in this role. And I acknowledge that they have an opportunity to think that way. That's not outside of the bounds of what could be thought. And I want to be respectful of them, and I'm not going to, that's okay. You know what I mean? Like, I believe that God has given me this opportunity. He's placed me in this role for the season. My husband and my church believe that I'm a part of this role. So does the community here, that I'm gifted to do this. But that's another interesting aspect. So do I, when you think theologically, I will not preach on a Sunday morning in a church, or there's certain boundaries that I try to walk carefully within, as a Christian serving in a Christian college, is that if I was male, I don't think I would have those sort of, I would not, if I was male, I would receive different invitations and maybe take different opportunities differently. But again, I have colleagues who do that, and I'm grateful for them. They're gifted preachers and teachers. So I take the spaces that within the theological space, I take the spaces that I'm called to, the spaces that are available, and thank the Lord for them, and trust Him with other people's place. So does that make sense on that? It is a delicate dance. I've often said it would be easier to be the president of a private non-faith-based college than it would be to kind of walk the dance of being a female president of a faith-based school. But again, that's okay. I love the community I'm in, and I respect everyone's differences of opinion, and they get the chance to walk those out. But it does create some unique dynamics.
President Liddell, I'm really grateful for your reflection and your honesty and letting us into your world a little bit there as you process through that. Thank you. Thank you. I'm calling from Marburg. Marburg University is a bastion of liberalism. So as you're talking, it's like, oh yeah, I remember those issues. But thank you for bringing us through that and helping us see that. Really appreciate that. Wendy, if I can ask one final question. It's a question that we ask all of the contributors to this program. And one of the things that we're doing in Unitatem Fide is we're storm chasing. We're chasing this dynamic that's taking place around the world, as everybody has an opportunity to speak with one another in a way that they didn't just even a few years ago. We're chasing this story of the increasing unity of the Christian movement. In some places in the world, Christians are coming together and seeing more eye to eye. Some places there's new divisions creeping in. So it's a very complex story. I'd love to have your reflection, if I could. What is it that Christians could do in Spokane, Washington, in the Pacific Northwest, maybe even in the context of Great Northern University? What is it that Christians can do to pursue Jesus' call and prayer for Christian unity?
Yeah. It's interesting as I think about being in a space. Our institution serves people from a variety of Orthodox faith traditions. So we have students who come from Assemblies of God backgrounds and students who come from Reformed backgrounds. So a variety of students coming from a variety of places. And I think one of the things that we've seen in our student body as we've work through the question of what are the essentials of the Christian faith, what are the tertiary issues, what are the secondary issues. I think we see a lot of unity within our student body of an acceptance of, we believe these core things about who God is and about his word and about his world. And then there are other pieces that we may hold personally, but we hold them with a degree of humility and with an open hand, believing this is where God has planted us or directed us, but also acknowledging that others may not be in that, hold that degree of conviction about that certain doctrine. So I think within our institution, as we've sought to focus in on core doctrinal issues, really refining for students what's important and what's not important. How do you think? How do we think well? How do we speak? How do we write well? We've seen a unity within that we hope will also bleed out into other spaces. However, I think also within the Spokane community, being part of an institution that is fairly neutral as a Christian organization, we've also had opportunities to partner and to engage individuals from a variety of faith traditions, which has been exciting to see that work as well. So whether one of our current projects that we're picking back up post-COVID is a regional missions conference for youth, designed to help students go and fulfill the Great Commission and practically do it as youth. So that multi-church, multi-agency sort of unity around how do we do this together and equipping youth to go out has been something that's been exciting to see and to be a part of, and to really not host, but to be a part of. So we've seen some of that within the community, and a greater degree of unity as well. I think one thing that's happened, at least in Washington State, dealing with so many regulations, has been a need for one another, a need for partnership, a need for dialogue, a need for discussion, a need for support. So a need. So we've seen other groups form and stabilize. It's been unifying across groups. And then I also just reflecting, again, one of the things in starting Great Northern that we've seen and is that we have a broad support base that I've been grateful for across the body of Christ. That there's a unity around Christian education that I have just been witness to that's been incredible, a desire for that in the Northwest, and people from different backgrounds and spaces in their faith journey coming in and praying, supporting, encouraging. That's been another incredible journey that I think we've seen lived out. What does it look like into the future? I hope it's strengthened, truthfully, as we go forward. I think it will need to be strengthened. I also hope there's a greater degree of, I don't know, just strengthening, which I think will come as people are gathering, are meeting, are working together, that I believe God gives dreamers to these groups as well, as people are dreaming and envisioning the future together, that there will be more hope that comes from that. And hopefully less fracturing, Jonathan, too. I mean, that's incredibly hard. It hurts when bodies of believers struggle. So I'd love to see more of that. I love that your project is working in that space. So it's encouraging.
Thanks, Wendy. President Liddell, it's been a gigantic privilege to be speaking with you today. Thanks so much for sharing some of your insights and this amazing story of what's going on at Great Northern University. Thank you so much for joining us today.
You're welcome, John. Thanks so much. It's been an honor and a privilege. Thanks for the invitation. I've been grateful to share. So I appreciate it. Have a great evening.